Hey guys, tonight we journey into a world you think you know, but trust me, you don't. You've seen the cowboy hats, the tumbleweeds, the campfires under starry skies. Maybe a grizzled man warming beans in a tin while a harmonica cries in the distance. But surviving the freezing nights of the Wild West was no cinematic stroll into the sunset. It was cold, bitter, bone deep, and filled with more creative misery than most history books dare to mention. Before we head west into the frost and grit, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. It's always fascinating to see who else is fighting off sleep from halfway across the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft hum in the background. Let's slow everything down. Breathe out the day. And let's slip into tonight's story together, tonight's journey, how people survived cold nights in the Wild West. Let's clear something up right away. When we say Wild West, we're not just talking about one place. It wasn't all dusty saloons and deserts. Much of the American frontier was cold. Rugged mountain passes, endless plains, windswept badlands, and territories where winter came early and overstayed its welcome. You're about to walk into a world without central heating. No Gore-Tex jackets, no microwavable anything. No electric blankets or insulated cabins. Just rough canvas tents, rattling cabins, drafty wagons, and skin-cracking air that turned your breath into ice. This wasn't a world where people thrived through winter. They survived. And survival meant ingenuity, discomfort, and making peace with the fact that every creaking wind could be your last lullaby. In tonight's journey, we'll follow you, yes, you, as you wake up shivering in a sod house or a canvas tent somewhere on the frozen plains. We'll go hour by hour through the kind of cold that makes your teeth ache and your joints creak. You'll eat whatever didn't freeze solid overnight. Layer on every piece of itchy wool you own. Fight off frostbite with whiskey and folklore. Cough into a burlap sack and pray it wasn't the start of pneumonia. There were no thermostats, only fire. No indoor plumbing, just icy treks to outhouses that might be buried under snowdrifts. And when the firewood ran out, you learned to burn buffalo chips or twisted prairie grass, hoping it gave more heat than smoke. These people weren't just ranchers and gunslingers. They were mothers trying to keep their babies from freezing. Freed slaves chasing hope through blizzards, immigrants with calloused hands and frostbitten dreams. Children wrapped in rags sleeping beside the family cow because it was the warmest thing left. So tonight, we're going to slow down and walk, no, trudge, into that world. Not the heroic Wild West, the real one. The damp, smoky, snow-crusted, sleep-deprived, frost-bitten one. We'll start in the dark. You'll open your eyes in a tiny shack with frost on the inside of the walls. Your breath fogs in the air like smoke. And the fire. Well, you're going to have to start it. Again. So pull your blanket tighter. The wind is already howling outside, and we're just getting started. You wake up cold, colder than you thought a human could be and still be breathing. There's no alarm clock, just a creeping awareness that your toes feel wrong. Not painful, not quite numb, just wrong. Like they've forgotten how to be toes. Your nose is colder than the inside of a forgotten root cellar, and the tip of one ear almost feels suspiciously stiff. Your blanket is barely a blanket. 2 layers of rough wool that itch more than they insulate. You wrapped yourself in it last night like a burrito of desperation, tucking it under your boots, folding it over your chest, pressing your hands to your ribs just to hold in the heat. It didn't work. The room is dark, not peaceful dark, but no sun for hours dark. You're inside a shack, if you can call 4 nailed-together planks and a sloped roof a shack. The wind groans against the wall like it wants in, and it always wants in. The gaps between the wooden boards glow faintly silver with moonlight and frost. You can see your own breath. It curls out of your mouth like smoke from a dying campfire. You wonder how long you've been asleep. An hour? 2? Time in this kind of cold isn't measured in minutes. It's measured in survival. The bed creaks beneath you. Not a mattress. Those are for people with money and floors. You're sleeping on a pile of hay stuffed into a ticking sack, flattened over the years into something between a mat and a disappointment. It smells like dust, old sweat, and the faint, sour scent of mouse droppings. If you're lucky, the mice stayed on their side last night. If you're not, well, you're warm enough now that they'll move back in soon. You shift slightly and regret it immediately. Your back is stiff. Your shoulders ache from curling tight all night, trying to conserve warmth. One hip has gone numb against the wooden plank floor. The ache in your bones doesn't just come from cold. It comes from work. From hauling water, chopping wood, digging frozen dirt. You don't just live in the Wild West. You serve it, daily. A gust of wind hits the wall like a slap. Something rattles overhead, maybe a loose board, maybe a bird skeleton lodged in the roof. The wind whistles through the chinks in the walls, cold fingers reaching across the room like it's searching for bare skin. You shiver, not delicately, but violently. Your whole body contracts, a spasm from gut to jaw. Your boots are next to the bed, or they should be. You were smart enough to stuff them with crumpled paper and tuck them under the blanket with you. Not because you're neat, because if they freeze overnight, you won't be able to get them on come morning. Or worse, you will get them on, and your toes will thaw just in time to feel the frostbite. You reach out, bare hand meeting air that feels like it's made of needles. Your fingers close around the boot. It's stiff. Not frozen, but it wants to be. You fumble with your coat. Heavy wool crusted with salt from old sweat, patched in 3 places with thread that doesn't match. It still smells faintly of smoke and axle grease. You sleep in it. You live in it. You've bled into the sleeve at least twice. You sit up slowly, careful not to bang your head on the sloped ceiling. The roof is low and uneven. One good snowfall and you'll be brushing frost off your bedroll. You look up at the rafters, if you can call them that. Just beams of wood blackened from smoke. A dried sprig of herbs hangs by a string. Some old settler superstition about keeping bad spirits away. So far, it's only worked half the time. The fire went out sometime in the night. Of course it did. The embers are buried under ash, barely glowing. You forgot to bank it properly last night. Or maybe you just ran out of decent wood. Either way, there's no heat coming from the hearth. You can see a little puff of frost forming on the inside of the stovepipe. You should get up. Should stir the coals. Should light it again. but the idea of taking your hands out of your armpits feels like a betrayal of every survival instinct you have. Somewhere outside, a coyote howls. Long, distant, mournful. You wonder if it's hungry or just complaining about the weather. Probably both. Coyotes are like settlers. They don't thrive out here. They just last longer than the weak ones. In the corner of the shack, your water bucket sits with a thin crust of ice over the top. You'll have to break it if you want a drink. You stare at it, contemplating the effort. The floorboards under your feet are cold as iron. If you drop the cup, it might shatter. You've already lost 2 this winter, and you're not walking 12 miles to the trading post for another. Not unless you want to die stylishly in a snowdrift. Your fingers fumble for your gloves, wool, frayed, fingerless. They're next to your hat, thick, scratchy, and pulled down low enough to cover your ears, which are still tossing from the cold. You tug it on with slow, clumsy movements. Every muscle feels like it's moving through syrup. Your body doesn't want to wake up. It wants to hibernate. A log creaks in the stove. You freeze. Listen. Wait. Could be the cold shifting the wood. Could be something else. Out here, the line between wind and threat is thin. Thin as the blanket you slept under. You rise at last. Barely. You stagger to your feet like a reanimated corpse. One socked foot hits the icy floor, then the other. You hiss through your teeth. It's not dignified, but neither is this place. Dignity froze to death 3 winters ago. You shuffle to the stove, open it, dig through the ash. There's one coal still glowing, barely. You cup your hands around it like a prayer. You breathe into it. You whisper nonsense. You feed it a curl of bark and a splinter of kindling, and hope that just this once the fire comes back. This is waking up in the Wild West, not with a rooster, not with a sunrise, with pain, with cold, with silence and wind, and 1,000 decisions that all add up to don't die today. And now that you're up, it's time to start the real battle. You're hungry, you're thirsty, and worst of all, you're going to have to go outside soon. The fire's crackling now, barely. But enough. You've won round 1. Your reward? A cold biscuit and a face full of ash. Your fingers still don't bend properly. Your breath still fogs the air. But the little orange glow inside the stove is alive again. And for now, that's all that matters. The warmth hasn't reached the walls. It won't, not really. But it gives the illusion of comfort. And out here, that's about as close as you'll get. Now comes the next battle. Breakfast. Or more accurately, survival calories. You shuffle toward your supplies. Pantry would be a generous word. It's a box in the corner of the cabin. A dented tin pail. A sack that once held flour, but now mostly holds hope and disappointment. You open it slowly, fingers trembling not from hunger, but from cold. There's some hardtack, a few pieces. You knock one against the wall. It makes a sound like stone. That's a good sign. If it crumbles, it's gone moldy. If it bends, it's cursed. But if it chips your tooth... Breakfast. You chew slowly, jaw grinding like a reluctant gear. It's dry. It's flavorless. It's from 3 weeks ago, maybe 4. You douse it with a splash of whatever's left in the tin mug. Weak coffee? Could be. Could also be boiled river water you forgot to label. You drink it anyway. Out here, taste isn't a priority. Temperature is. Sometimes breakfast is just beans left over from the night before. Cold, oily, clinging to the sides of the pot like regrets. Other times, it's cornmeal mush cooked into a kind of gray paste. No sugar, no milk. Just grit, heat, and enough salt to remind you you're still alive. If you're lucky, and I mean really lucky, there's jerky, a strip of dried meat tougher than the boot leather you nearly mistook it for. You gnaw at it like a wild animal, not out of enjoyment, but necessity. If you close your eyes and chew slowly enough, you can almost pretend it's bacon. You don't. That kind of imagination gets people killed. You scrape the last crumbs from the tin plate with your fingers. There's no napkin, no dish towel. You just lick them clean, because water's precious, and firewood more so. One plate, one tin cup, one battered spoon that's probably older than the state you're living in. That's your full kitchen inventory. And now that you've fed the fire and barely fed yourself, it's time to try and wash your face. You approach the water bucket like it owes you money. The thin ice crust from earlier has thickened. You break it again with the spoon handle. The water beneath is black, still, and colder than sin. You dunk a rag in it. It stiffens almost immediately. You press it to your face. It's not refreshing. It's punishment. Like slapping yourself with a fish that hates you. Your skin shrinks away from the touch, and you catch your reflection in the ice. Red nose, cracked lips, beard frosted at the corners. If you're clean, it's only because the dirt froze and fell off. Toothbrushing? That's optimistic. If you're disciplined, you might chew on a stick. A sliver of sweet birch or willow bark to scrape the fuzz off your teeth. Maybe rub it with a pinch of baking soda if you've got some. But most mornings, you settle for a cold splash of water and the hope that your breath freezes before anyone has to smell it. Soap? Sure. It exists. A cracked bar of lye soap sits on a shelf like a forgotten artifact. It smells vaguely of ashes and regret. You use it sparingly because your skin's already dry, and soap only makes it crack faster. You lather just enough to claim you tried. Maybe a quick scrub of the armpits with a wet rag. Maybe. As for bathing, that's a whole different war. In the warmer months, you'd wash in the river, if you didn't mind the leeches and the snapping turtles. But now, in winter, you'd be insane to try. Bathing means heating water in a pot, standing in a cold room with no insulation, and trying not to lose a toe before you rinse. You do it only when the filth becomes more uncomfortable than the frostbite. Hair, you run your fingers through it and hope it lies flat. If not, you jam on your hat and call it a style. Out here, grooming is more about preventing lice than impressing the neighbors. You've combed your beard with a fork before. You'll do it again. And the outhouse. Oh, the outhouse. You've been holding it. Everyone holds it. Because nobody wants to go outside first thing in the morning. Especially not when the wind is slapping the trees sideways. But eventually, nature wins. You throw on your coat. You grab a lantern if you've got oil. You march out the door like you're storming a fortress. And it is a fortress. Of horror. The outhouse is 20 feet from the shack. That doesn't sound far. It is. When the wind's slicing at your legs and the snow is crunchy enough to warn predators 3 counties over, you kick open the frozen door. The seat is a block of ice. You sit fast, do your business faster, and spend the rest of the day trying to forget what just happened. Toilet paper? Let's not pretend. You've got a stack of old newspaper and a few corn husks that you're not emotionally ready to talk about. You use what you have. You burn what you can. And you leave the outhouse like it's a war zone. You come back inside, boots caked in snow, breath fogging in the air. You stomp, shake off the worst of the cold, and hang your coat by the stove. You sit for a minute, letting the fire warm your bones. The room still smells like ash, coffee, damp wool, and something else, something earthy, like wet boots and hopelessness. You've eaten. You've washed, barely. You've braved the toilet, and the sun still hasn't fully risen. The West is wild, but it's not just danger and lawlessness. It's a world where personal hygiene is a luxury and breakfast is anything that doesn't kill you. There are no showers, no clean towels, no fresh juice in the fridge, just frozen socks, cracked lips, and a bowl of bean sludge that barely counts as food. And yet, you're up, you're alive. You've done what needed to be done. You didn't freeze, you didn't starve, and you didn't get stuck to the outhouse seat. So as you wrap that scarf tighter and shovel a few more coals into the stove, you remind yourself, it may not be much, but it's morning in the Wild West, and somehow, you're still standing. You're dressed now, technically, but let's not pretend you're warm. Your coat? It's heavy. Sure. Thick with wool lined with whatever fur you could trap or trade. Maybe coyote. Maybe badger. Maybe something that used to hiss at you before becoming a collar. But the wind still finds ways in, through the seams, through the cuffs, through the places your elbow wore thin after 5 winters of chopping wood. And yes, you patched it. Twice. With a piece of saddle leather and an old dishcloth. You're proud of it. But proud doesn't mean warm. It just means stubborn. Your base layer, if it can be called that, is a coarse wool shirt you haven't dared wash since last spring. Not because you're lazy, but because wet wool in winter is the closest thing to a death sentence you can buy for free. The shirt itches, it chafes, it smells faintly of gun oil, tobacco, and old regret. But it's yours, and it's still mostly in one piece. Pants, thicker than the shirt, mercifully. Canvas or heavy duck cloth, maybe denim if you got lucky at the trading post. You wear long underwear underneath, threadbare, patched, and made of a material that feels halfway between sandpaper and burlap. The elastic gave out 3 years ago, so you use a belt and prayer. Your boots are solid, at least they used to be. Now they're worn slick at the heel, the leather cracked from so many freeze-thaw cycles they've developed more character than your neighbors. You've lined them with old newspaper before, or dried grass, or, on one desperate occasion, a piece of an old saddlebag. Anything to keep the frost from reaching your toes. Socks? You own 1 good pair, and 5 bad ones. On really cold nights, you layer them all and pray your boots still fit. Gloves, fingerless. Of course. You need your fingers free to work, light fires, shoot rifles, and tie rope. So your fingertips burn every time the wind hits them. But that's fine. Numb fingers are just part of the uniform. Then there's the hat. Your crown. Your shield against the sky. If you're fancy, it's beaver felt. If not, It's some stitched-together thing made of whatever was left at the general store. Either way, it's crushed, dusty, and molded perfectly to your head after 1,000 dawns and too many downpours. You pull it low, over your ears. The brim is stiff with frost and bad weather, but it still does its job. And now that you're dressed like a walking quilt made of misery and mothballs, let's talk shelter. Because no matter what Hollywood tells you, most Wild West homes weren't picturesque log cabins with rocking chairs and neatly chopped firewood. They were shacks, dugouts, soddies, lean-tos slapped together in a weekend and held up more by cussedness than carpentry. If you live in a sod house, congratulations. You have walls made of dirt. Not a joke. Literal chunks of prairie, dug up and stacked like bricks. It holds heat better than wood, sure. But it also holds insects and mold and the kind of damp that seeps into your bones and stays there through April. Your sod house is low to the ground, with one window made of greased paper or maybe an old glass pane salvaged from a wagon wreck. The roof? A patchwork of logs, grass, and wishful thinking. It leaks in spring, sags in winter, and occasionally lets in raccoons looking for leftovers. The floor? Dirt. Covered with straw, if you're lucky. Covered with regret, if you're not. You sweep it with a bundle of dry weeds tied together with twine and pretend it helps. The stove sits in the center of the room, vented through a crooked pipe that may or may not catch fire one day. You don't own a fire extinguisher. You are the fire extinguisher. If you're living in a log cabin, things are only marginally better. The walls are solid, yes. Logs chinked with mud or moss, depending on how ambitious you were the day you built it. But there are gaps, always gaps, where the wind whistles in and the snow piles up in corners. You wake up with frost on the inside of the windows, and sometimes your boots are frozen to the floorboards. The roof is a slanted sheet of shingles or bark or tar paper. It creaks, it groans, and it always threatens to cave in during the first snowstorm of the season. You lie in bed some nights listening for drips, because if water starts leaking through the ceiling, that means two things. Something up there has melted. You're about to have a really bad day. There's no insulation. The walls are cold to the touch. If you sit too close to the fire, your front roasts and your back freezes. There's no in-between. You live in a world of extremes, hot and cold, wet and dry, safe and, oh God, was that a cougar? And then there's the wagon. If you're on the move, or worse, still settling, you might be sleeping in a covered wagon. Canvas stretched over wooden hoops, swaying in the wind like a ship at sea. The floor is a plank bed, or just the wooden base of the wagon itself. You tuck blankets around the drafty corners, stuff rags into every seam, and pray the wind doesn't tear the canvas loose. Every creak sounds like trouble. Every gust of wind is a reminder that you're one bad blizzard away from being buried in a mobile coffin. Shelter in the Wild West wasn't about comfort. It was about containment. Keeping the cold out, keeping the heat in, keeping the predators curious but distant. You didn't build homes for beauty. You built them because you had no other choice. They leaned, they sagged, they smoked and creaked and leaked and groaned. But they were yours. And when the wind blew and the coyotes howled and the fire sputtered low, those thin walls were the only thing standing between you and a long, frozen night with your name carved on a pinewood board. And so you settle back in, pull your coat tighter, stir the coals, shake the snow from your hat, Your cabin isn't much, but it keeps you alive. And out here, that's more than enough. You're dressed. You're fed, sort of. And now it's time to work. Because in the Wild West, idleness isn't an option. It's a death sentence with a delayed fuse. The wind's still sharp. The sun, low and indifferent. The snow crunches beneath your boots, and every breath feels like dragging ice into your lungs. Your hands ache. Your back's already sore. And you haven't even picked up a tool yet. That's the thing no one tells you. Out here, the day doesn't begin with a to-do list. It begins with a question. What might kill me if I don't fix it today? First stop, the woodpile, or what's left of it. Because heat isn't optional, and firewood doesn't grow chopped. You grab your axe from the hook by the door, handle worn smooth, blade nicked from hitting rocks hidden in logs, and head toward the stack. If you're lucky, it's not buried in snow. If you're unlucky, the whole pile is frozen solid into a sculpture called Guess You're Cold Tonight. You swing and swing and swing. Chopping wood isn't romantic. It's not scenic. It's not something you do for exercise. It's punishment served by the hour. Your shoulders burn. Your breath turns ragged. The axe handle stings with every impact. One log splits wrong and clips your shin. Doesn't break anything. Just reminds you who's boss. And it's not you. You stack the wood near the cabin. Neat enough so it doesn't fall. Loose enough so the wind doesn't use it as a battering ram. And then, it's on to the water. There's no pump, no pipes, no faucet to turn with cold fingers and curse when it doesn't run. No. Out here, you haul it, from a well or a creek or a snowmelt trickle that only appears when the ground forgets it's winter. You fill a bucket, or two, if you're feeling brave. Each one feels like it's made of stone. The handle digs into your palm. The cold climbs your wrist like a snake, wrapping around your bones. And heaven help you if you spill it. That means going back. Then it's the animals. Because even if you're cold and miserable and behind schedule, your livestock is colder and more miserable and entirely dependent on you. If you've got cattle, they need hay, and the haystack is frozen. Again. You chip at it with a pitchfork, pulling out great frozen slabs like you're serving rough-cut lasagna made of dry grass and regret. The cows blink at you, frosted whiskers, silent accusations. Their breath hangs heavy in the air. They chew slowly. Sometimes they steam like locomotives. Other times they stand frozen, hooves encased in muck and ice, waiting for you to remember they exist. If you've got chickens, they're angrier. They squawk as soon as you open the coop door, offended that the sun rose and their water dish is a solid block of ice. You bring them warm water, only to find it frozen again 30 minutes later. You scatter feed, check for eggs. You find one, frozen and cracked, the yolk solid as glass. You keep it anyway. If you've got a horse, it needs grooming, not for vanity, for health. Ice mats in its mane, mud clumps in its hooves. You work fast, fingers numb, back aching, all while the horse tries to nuzzle your shoulder like it doesn't know it's twice your size and occasionally homicidal. And then comes the real work. Because it's not just surviving today. It's preparing for tomorrow. And the next storm. And the next blizzard. And the next time the roof leaks, the door warps, or the chimney belches smoke like it's possessed. So you repair. Constantly. You fix the barn door that keeps swinging open. You hammer it shut with a bent nail and a prayer. You patch the hole in the roof with tar paper and scrap wood. It holds. Barely. You'll check it again tomorrow, after it sags under the next snow. You inspect the fence line, stomping through knee-high snowdrifts to make sure the wire hasn't snapped under the weight of wind and bad luck. One loose board, and your cow is tomorrow's missing persons report. You carry supplies, check traps, oil hinges, shovel paths, feed dogs, tie down canvas, hammer, saw, haul, lift, curse, repeat. And if you're not tending your own land well, you're working someone else's. Maybe you're a ranch hand. Up before dawn, riding fence line on a half-starved horse, driving cattle through snow so deep it eats hooves. You eat beans cold from the can, sleep under a canvas tent so thin it flaps like a funeral shroud, and get paid in coin, coffee, and calluses. Or maybe you're a fur trapper, wading through icy creeks, checking snares, skinning animals in a frozen tent while your fingers go stiff from the blood and the wind. You dry the pelts over the fire and pretend you don't hear wolves just past the trees. Or you're a freight hauler, pulling a sled up a mountain trail that wasn't meant for men or mules, fighting through snowdrifts that swallow wagons whole, hoping the axle doesn't snap, hoping your boots hold together, hoping the whiskey in your flask doesn't run out before your strength does. Because out here, the work never ends. It's not romantic. It's not rugged. It's a war. A war fought against cold, against wind, against broken tools, rotten boards, spoiled food, frozen ground, and the kind of exhaustion that settles in your bones and waits. There's no quitting time, no clock to punch, just darkness creeping in earlier than you expected, reminding you that if you don't finish your chores before sundown, you'll be doing them again by lantern light, with colder fingers and less hope. But still, you work, because no one else will do it for you. Not the government, not the preacher, not the neighbor 2 miles away whose tracks disappeared in last week's blizzard. This land is harsh. This land is cruel. But if you work hard enough, suffer long enough, and never stop moving, maybe, you'll carve out a life from it. Or at least survive another day. You've put in a hard day's work. Your hands are raw, your back is bent, and there's dirt in places you'd rather not discuss. But as night approaches and the wind picks up again, something else settles over the land. Not snow, not smoke. Something older, something quieter, something watching. Out here in the Wild West, survival wasn't just about firewood and fences. It was also about belief, about meaning, about forces bigger than you, whether that meant God, ghosts, or the full moon rising behind the barn like a glowing silver omen. Religion was everywhere, but not the kind with stained glass and polished pews. This was rougher, dustier. Sermons shouted from wooden platforms nailed together last Tuesday. Baptisms in icy creeks. Bibles with tobacco stains and gunshot holes. Prayer meetings held in kitchens, barns, or under the open sky where congregation meant whoever wasn't too tired to kneel. You didn't just believe in God, you needed God. Because out here, Death could come quietly or screaming. It could fall from the sky as a blizzard, strike from the brush as a snake, or gallop in on horseback with a rifle and bad intentions. You needed to believe there was something more, that the suffering had a purpose, that your child's fever meant something, that your neighbor's cow dying mysteriously wasn't just bad luck, but maybe a test, a punishment, a message. Sundays, if you were lucky enough to have a church nearby, meant scrubbing the dirt off your hands, putting on your cleanest shirt, and sitting in a wooden shack while a traveling preacher yelled about hell, sin, and salvation, his voice echoing against bare walls, his Bible worn to the bone. He might arrive on horseback, sleep in your barn, and leave with a sack of potatoes and a handshake. But not everyone could make it to church. So home religion took over. You read scripture by lamplight, lips moving silently, even if you couldn't read all the words. You crossed yourself before meals. You whispered psalms during storms. And when you buried someone, because you always did, you said the Lord's Prayer over their grave and hoped you got the words right. Yet for all this faith, there were other beliefs too, the kind that didn't come from books. Superstition was survival. It filled in the gaps where God seemed quiet and logic failed to comfort. You nailed a horseshoe above the door to keep evil out. You turned your socks inside out during a lightning storm. You never let a black dog cross your path without spitting over your left shoulder. Why? Because your grandmother did it, and she lived to 90. You believed in signs. A raven perched on the fence post meant death. A broken mirror cursed your cabin for 7 years. A child born with a veil over its face was a seer, blessed or cursed or both. Many settlers, especially immigrants, brought their folk magic with them. German families might whisper of hexes and protective symbols drawn in chalk. Irish settlers told tales of banshees and fairy lights dancing on the plains. Mexicans in the Southwest blended Catholicism with ancient indigenous rituals, candles for saints, herbs for healing, salt circles to ward off spirits. Medicine women and midwives carried more than bandages and boiling water. They carried charms, dried herbs tied in red string, old songs sung under their breath during childbirth, a secret prayer murmured while burning sage to clear the air after a death. You didn't question it, because out here, if something worked, even once, you kept doing it. If someone saw a light moving across the prairie where no one lived, they said it was a ghost, or a soul not at rest, or someone buried without a proper cross. If your baby cried all night and nothing soothed him, you might wonder if he'd been cursed, or if the wind had whispered something through the cracks of your sod house that it shouldn't have. If your well ran dry and the neighbors didn't, well, maybe he buried something at the crossroads. Maybe he made a deal. Maybe he said the wrong thing on the wrong night, and the wind listened. The crossroads were feared, sacred. You didn't linger there at dusk. You didn't camp there. You didn't bury things there unless you didn't want them found again. It was where worlds crossed, where things happened, dreams mattered. If you dreamed of teeth falling out, it meant someone was going to die. If you dreamed of snakes, it meant betrayal. If you dreamed of running water, it meant change or danger, or both. Every creak in the cabin was suspicious. Every shadow might be more than just wind through the shutters. You learned to listen to the land, not because you were mystical, but because if you didn't, it might kill you. You learned to watch the sky for signs. Red sunrise meant trouble. A ring around the moon meant snow. A sudden hush from the animals meant a predator was near or something worse. And still, you prayed. You prayed for health, for rain, for warmth, for mercy. You prayed for your wife, who hadn't stopped coughing since the thaw, for your child, who hadn't spoken since the snakebite, for your neighbor, who vanished on a hunting trip and came back changed. And sometimes you prayed just because it made the silence bearable. Because at night, when the fire burned low and the cabin creaked like an old ship drifting across a frozen sea, you needed to believe that someone, anyone, was listening. That the howling wind wasn't just wind. That the footsteps in the snow outside your window weren't real. That the face you saw just for a second in the firelight was only your imagination. Out here, faith wasn't a choice. It was armor. Superstition wasn't silly. It was a survival tactic. And prayer wasn't always hopeful. Sometimes it was desperate. Because on the frontier, you were never quite alone. But you were never quite sure what else was out there with you. It's evening now. The wind's calmed a little. The sky's turning that soft, smoky purple. The kind of sky that says, you made it through another day. Barely. Which means it's time for two things: food and whatever passes for fun in a land held together by frost and gunpowder. Let's talk about the first one. Supper. Not dinner. That's too formal. Supper is what you scrape together after a day of survival. It's hot, if you're lucky. Nutritious? Rarely. Filling? Hopefully. Delicious? Not unless your standards have been bludgeoned into submission by years of salted meat and beans. Tonight, you're boiling beans again. Pinto, if you have them. Whatever else if you don't. They were soaked overnight in the same water you used to wash your shirt. You pretend not to notice the aftertaste. You throw in a piece of salt pork, if there's any left. It's tough, chewy, so salty it makes your eyes twitch. But it's meat, and meat is gold out here. You don't question its age. You don't ask what part of the pig it came from. You just slice, simmer, and stir. Bread? Maybe. A bit of hardtack softened in the stew, or cornbread if you had time to bake. No yeast. Just baking soda, flour, lard, and prayer. You eat it slow so it lasts longer. Every bite is gritty with ash from the stove or dust from the air. Doesn't matter. You eat it anyway. If it's a special night, say a neighbor stopped by or someone shot a rabbit, you might even fry up some meat over the fire. A little black around the edges, a little pink in the middle. No one's picky. Rare just means still warm. Vegetables? Seasonal, which means mostly non-existent in winter. You might have some root vegetables stored, carrots, maybe a turnip the size of a fist. If you're really fancy, you've got pickled beets in a jar from 3 summers ago. You crack it open like treasure, trying not to think about what you'll do when the jars run out. Water? You boiled it. Twice. Just to be safe. But if you want real flavor, you pour a splash of coffee from the pot that's been simmering since sunrise. It's black, bitter, and tastes faintly of tin and desperation. No cream, no sugar. You stopped dreaming of that years ago. And for some folks, especially on the tougher days. There's whiskey, bad whiskey, cheap whiskey, bootlegged stuff that might also clean a rifle or strip paint off a wagon. Doesn't matter. It warms your throat, fogs your mind, and helps you forget that your boots still haven't dried from yesterday's snow. Supper is quick, efficient, barely conversation-worthy. But when the food's gone and the plates are stacked, that's when something strange happens. People start to laugh. Because out here, entertainment doesn't come from a stage. It comes from each other. Maybe it's a harmonica, banged up, dented, notes slightly off. But when someone plays it right, the whole room quiets down. Boots tap, heads nod. Nobody speaks. Not because they're moved, but because it's the first sound all day that isn't the wind or someone coughing. Or maybe it's a fiddle. The good fiddle. The one brought all the way from Kentucky in a case padded with old love letters and newspaper clippings. When that fiddle comes out, people clear space, push the chairs aside, and just like that, a dance. Boots sliding across dirt floors, skirts twirling, someone shouting faster, even though they'll regret it in the morning, children giggling under the table, an old man clapping in time with a hand missing 2 fingers. This is joy, Wild West style, sudden, raucous, and always a little off-key. Other nights, it's just storytelling. You lean back in a creaking chair, coat still on, hat still tilted, and let someone else spin a tale. About a man who once roped a mountain lion. About a woman who walked 30 miles in a blizzard to save her baby. About a ghost that whistles outside windows during the first snow. And the stories grow with every telling. A 10-point buck becomes a 12. A bar fight turns into a frontier war. A stranger with no name becomes the devil himself, riding a black horse that didn't leave tracks. You know the stories aren't all true, but out here, truth is flexible. What matters is how the tale lands, whether it makes people laugh or cry, or check their windows twice before bed. And of course, there's the tavern. If you're near a town, and town might just mean 4 buildings and a broken sign, there's a saloon. A place with sticky floors, swinging doors, and whiskey poured from a bottle with no label. The piano only plays 3 songs. The bartender has 1 good eye and no patience. But it's alive, loud, warm. Cards slap the table. Dice clatter. Laughter rises like smoke. There's always a man in the corner pretending he knows how to read. Always someone trying to win back their horse in a game of poker they're clearly losing. The girls who work the room are painted, perfumed, and tougher than any cowboy. They pour drinks, swat hands, and sometimes sing, sometimes dance, sometimes disappear upstairs with men who forget their wedding vows the moment the whiskey hits. It's not glamorous. It's not even safe. But it feels like something close to civilization. And in the Wild West, that counts for more than you'd think. Festivals? Rare. But when they happen, they're unforgettable. Maybe it's the 4th of July with gunshots fired into the air and pies entered in contests judged by the only man in town who still has all his teeth. Maybe it's a wedding. Bride in borrowed lace, groom in his second-best hat. Everyone drunk by sundown. The preacher reading from memory because his Bible was lost in a flood. Or maybe it's a funeral. Yes, a funeral can be a social event. A time to gather, eat, drink, cry. tell stories, and remember that life is short, the land is cruel, and we're all just visitors out here in the dust. So you eat, you laugh, you dance if your legs aren't too tired. You drink if the bottle's not empty. You lean against a fence post and stare at the stars, pretending they care. Because out here, entertainment isn't about distraction. It's about survival of the soul. And as the fire crackles low and someone hums an old tune you only half remember, you feel it. That flicker of humanity, of community, of not being entirely alone. And in the Wild West, that might be the most luxurious feeling of all. You wake up in the middle of the night. The fire's down to a glow. The wind outside is howling again, and your throat, raw, dry, like you swallowed dust and it never left. You sit up, slowly. Every joint aches. Your chest tightens with the effort. You try not to cough, but the sound escapes anyway. Harsh, wet, deep. It echoes off the walls like a warning or a confession. And now you're afraid. Because in the Wild West, a cough is never just a cough. It could be dust. Or it could be the beginning of something you might not survive. This is the quiet horror that stalks every settler, rancher, trapper, and child born in a cabin with no doctor for 100 miles. Illness is always close, and medicine is always far. You don't catch colds out here. You catch fever. You don't get sore throats. You get consumption. You don't have infections. You have the rot. One wrong breeze, one bad cut, one careless sip of water. That's all it takes. You've seen it too many times. A man stumbles into town, pale, sweating, mumbling about belly pain. 2 days later, he's dead. A child gets a scratch climbing a fence. 4 days later, the wound smells sweet and wrong. A woman gives birth in a barn. Healthy baby, healthy mother. By sundown, the fever sets in. By morning, only the baby's left crying. There are no hospitals, no nurses in white coats, no ambulances rushing in with sirens and saline. There's you, there's the stove, there's whatever herbs someone buried in a sock drawer last winter. And there's hope, thinning like smoke. Let's talk about the medicine, if you even want to call it that. Your first line of defense is probably whiskey. Not because it heals anything, but because it feels like it might. You swish it for toothaches, dab it on wounds, pour it into fevers and pray it carries the sickness out like a flood. Next comes the herbs. If your grandmother taught you anything, you'll boil peppermint for nausea, yarrow for fevers, and chew willow bark for pain. Because that's nature's aspirin, even if it tastes like licking a tree. Turpentine? Yep. Some folks swore by it. Rubbed it on their chests. Drank it in spoonfuls. It didn't cure anything, but it did scare the sickness out. Sometimes by making you throw up everything you've eaten since Christmas. Camphor, laudanum, mustard plasters, castor oil. Each remedy feels like a dare. Each one's a toss of the dice. There are traveling doctors, of course. Men in dusty suits with black bags full of glass bottles and confidence. Some of them know what they're doing. Most don't. They sell tonics, mixtures of alcohol, opium, sugar, and good branding. The label says it cures gout, asthma, melancholy, snakebite, and women's hysteria. What it actually does is knock you unconscious long enough to stop complaining. And if none of that works, well, then you bring in the midwife or the medicine woman, depending on what part of the West you're in. They know the body better than most men. They don't ask permission. They mix potions, grind roots, chant under their breath while burning sage and tying knots in red thread. You don't question it, especially when it works. If it doesn't, you start carving the coffin. Because death isn't rare here. It's a neighbor. Not always violent. Not always loud. Sometimes it comes with a whimper, a slow fade, a wheeze in the chest that turns into blood on the pillow, a stomach pain that spreads like fire, a headache that becomes confusion, then silence. And sometimes it comes with speed. Cholera. That's the big one. Big show. It spreads like gossip and kills like war. You can be dancing one day and buried the next. It rides in on dirty water, bad meat, or the wrong handshake. You boil everything. Still not enough. Typhoid. Scarlet fever. Whooping cough. Diphtheria. Tuberculosis. Long names. Short lifespans. Children? Most don't live past 5. If they do, you count yourself lucky. If they don't, you build a little cross and you move on. Because you have to. Snakebite? Pray it wasn't venomous. If it was, hope someone has a knife and the stomach to use it. Tourniquet. Slice, spit, burn. Not because it works, but because doing something feels better than watching them die. Broken bones? Set it yourself. Splint it with wood and cloth. Hope it heals straight. If it doesn't, well, now you limp. Infected tooth? Pull it. Tie a string. Take a shot of whiskey. Wait for darkness. Then yank hard and scream louder. That's dentistry out here. Gunshot wound? Depends. If it went clean through, you have a chance. If it didn't, better make peace with the world. And yet, for all this fear, for all this death, people endure. Because there's no other choice. You don't live in fear of death. You live in partnership with it. It sharpens your senses, makes you grateful for a sunrise, a calm cough, a child who wakes up without fever. You laugh a little louder. You love a little harder. You savor every bite of stew because you don't know if your stomach will hold anything down tomorrow. And when someone dies, you bury them yourself. No mortician, no priest, unless one rides in by accident. You build the box, dig the hole, carve the name, read the passage. Maybe ashes to ashes, maybe just a whisper. Then you go back inside, stoke the fire, boil more water, stir the beans, hold the baby closer. Because life goes on, and death does too. They walk side by side in the West, like old friends who stopped fighting and learned to drink together instead. And maybe that's what gets you through it. Not medicine, not prayer, not even luck. Just the refusal to let go. Just one more sunrise, one more pot of coffee, one more winter survived. Because even when death stands outside your door, tapping on the wood with icy fingers, you still turn your back and throw another log on the fire. The cabin is quiet now. The fire burns low. Someone's rocking a baby in the corner. Someone's sewing by lantern light. Someone's crying softly and pretending not to be. This is family life in the Wild West. And it's not easy. It's not clean. It's not sentimental. But it's everything. Because out here, family isn't just a blessing. It's a team, a factory, a defense line against the cold and the dark. Let's start with women. Because if you think the Wild West was a man's world, you're only half right. Sure, men built fences and rode out to hunt. But women? Women built everything else. She wakes before the sun, not for quiet reflection, not for coffee, but because someone has to heat the water. Someone has to knead the dough, milk the goat, feed the chickens, sweep the floor, pack the lunches, and boil the cloth diapers. And that someone is her. She doesn't wear corsets, not out here. She wears layers of wool, cotton, sweat, and ash. Her hair is pulled back so tight it might never fall loose again. Her hands are calloused. Her back is tired. Her eyes, sharp, always watching. For sickness, for weather, for her husband not to come back late. She doesn't sit unless someone's dying. And even then, she brings a needle. She mends clothes while the soup boils. She shells peas while calming a crying toddler. She washes linens with lye soap and frozen fingers. She churns butter while humming hymns to a baby she may or may not get to raise. She knows childbirth isn't a private matter. It's a public gamble. There are no hospitals, no anesthetics, no sterile gloves. Just boiling water, old towels, and maybe a neighbor who remembers how it's done. And when the pains come, they come hard. She screams into a pillow, bites down on leather, and prays the child comes fast and breathing. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes she makes it. Sometimes she bleeds out before the sun rises. There's no soft music, no congratulations, no rest. Because once the baby cries, the work starts again. And then there's the unspoken rule. If a child lives, it's a miracle. If she lives, it's a second one. Motherhood is relentless out here. Not just feeding and rocking and scolding, but burying too. Tiny graves dot the countryside, unmarked, weathered, a fever, a cough, a bad winter. You don't talk about it. You just keep going. Children, if they live, don't stay children long. A 5-year-old might be expected to fetch water. A 6-year-old might be watching the baby. By 8, they're working alongside their parents, tending animals, pulling weeds, snapping beans, shooing flies from the outhouse. School? Sure. Sometimes. If there's a teacher. If there's no blizzard. If the chores are done. One-room schoolhouses dot the prairie. Uninsulated. Drafty. Lessons written on slate boards. Ink frozen solid by mid-January. And if you're lucky enough to learn to read, you still might not have books. So you read the Bible over and over and over. Girls learn to sew, to churn, to hush. Boys learn to chop, to shoot, to obey. But all of them learn to survive. They know what a frostbitten finger looks like. They know how to trap rabbits, how to splint a broken bone, how to dig a grave. Because out here, childhood isn't about innocence. It's about apprenticeship to reality. And still, they laugh. They race through fields with sticks for swords. They skip rocks across creeks. They whisper secrets in the hayloft. They dream of trains, of towns, of a world beyond the fence line. They get in trouble. They get switched. They cry. They heal. They grow. And by 16, they're marrying. Because family starts early, there's no dating, no proposals by candlelight. Just a handshake, a promise, a barn dance, and by next spring, another child. You build your own cabin. You inherit the same chores, the same fears, the same cold. And so the cycle turns. Fathers rarely speak more than necessary. When they do, it's often in commands, or warnings, or the occasional crooked smile. But when they hold their newborn for the first time, calloused hands trembling, eyes blinking back dust, something breaks through. Something human. Something ancient. Because even hardened men, even grizzled ranchers and trail-hardened scouts, they know what it means to belong to someone. Families in the Wild West don't thrive on affection. They thrive on reliability. You may not say, "I love you," but if you wake early to milk the cow before your wife gets out of bed, if you build a sled so your kids don't have to walk through waist-high snow, if you patch your husband's coat without asking, that is love. It's not soft. It's not poetic. It's practical. And it's the only kind that survives out here. Evenings are sacred, not in a religious sense, but in the way that survivors honor silence. The family gathers by the fire. Someone reads a passage. Someone hums. Someone snores in the corner. The baby fusses. The dog stretches. The stew simmers. And for a brief moment, the world feels safe. It won't last. The storms are coming. The livestock still need feeding. The roof is leaking again. But right now, you're together. You've endured. And in the Wild West, that's everything. The sun climbs higher, but it brings no comfort. Just more light to see how cracked the land is, how broken the fences are, how thin tempers have stretched. Because as brutal as the weather is, people can be worse. You step outside and you feel it, that tension in the air. Not the kind that comes before a storm, the kind that comes when neighbors haven't spoken in weeks, when someone's barn burned down and nobody knows or admits how it started. It's not always about gunfights and outlaws. That's just the stuff the storybooks like. No, real conflict out here starts quietly, with a broken fence line, with a cow grazing on someone else's land, with a lie traded over whiskey, with a grudge held longer than a winter. You live close to people, but not close enough to know them well. So rumors grow like weeds. That widow's got too much silver for someone who just buried her husband. That ranch hand ain't from around here, and no one's seen him pray once. I heard he's got Apache blood. Better keep your daughters inside. And suddenly, your afternoon is about more than feeding livestock. It's about navigating the politics of survival. Disputes over land are constant. Surveyors don't always measure right. Property lines blur. You swear the creek moved. Your neighbor swears your fence did. Guns get shown. Words get sharp. And sometimes, someone disappears. It's not always murder, but sometimes it is. The sheriff shows up 2 days late, shrugs, and says, "Don't poke snakes if you can't handle the bite." Justice here is negotiable. The law, if it exists, it's wearing dusty boots and a badge barely pinned on straight. Sheriffs are underpaid, overarmed, and usually trying to avoid dying before dinner. Deputies change weekly. Jails are just rooms with a cot and a rope on standby. Court? There might be one, but it's 60 miles away and snowed in half the year. So what happens when someone gets caught stealing? Depends. If it's a stranger, maybe they hang. If it's your neighbor's boy, maybe he gets whipped. If it's someone with friends, maybe it gets forgotten. But always, always, someone takes note. Because justice in the Wild West isn't blind. She's just nearsighted and easily bribed. Women face their own conflicts, quiet, cruel ones. A wrong glance at the general store, a whisper about her hemline, a suspicion that her husband left because of her, not because he froze to death trying to trade eggs for sugar. Gossip spreads faster than prairie fire. And once a woman's reputation is burned, it never grows back. She might be shunned, or worse, married off, because even if her husband beat her, even if he vanished, even if she never wanted the marriage to begin with, she's still someone's woman. And a woman alone is always suspicious, unless she's a widow. Then she's both pitied and feared, because she owns land. And some men don't like women with more property than patience. Children fight too, not with fists always, but with words, with loyalty, with bloodlines. That boy from the immigrant family, they mock his accent. That girl whose father drinks, they won't sit near her in church. The half-native child, he's tolerated until he wins at something. Then he's a cheater. Kids in the West grow up learning to swing a hammer and swing an insult. They understand where they stand in the pecking order, and they know deeply that some names carry more weight than others. That's why names matter. The Johnsons, old settlers, respected, feared maybe. The Crawfords, trouble, always have been. The Castillos, foreign but decent folk, keep to themselves. The McIntyres, murderers. Even if it was never proven, the stories stick. And once a name is stained, your children will wear it like a second skin. Race and identity aren't just facts. They're weapons. They're masks. They're survival tools. If you're white and Protestant, you're assumed trustworthy. If you're Catholic, someone will ask where your loyalties lie, Rome or rifle. If you're black, you keep your head down. You work twice as hard for half the respect. You build your own churches, your own schools, your own community, and you defend it like hell. If you're Mexican, you know the land better than anyone, but you're still treated like a trespasser. If you're native, you're either feared, pitied, or hated, depending on who you're talking to and what decade it is. You learn when to speak and when to vanish. You learn who will sell you supplies, who will spit at your feet, who will shake your hand with one and reach for a revolver with the other. Religion causes fights too. A new preacher arrives and condemns dancing. Half the town agrees. Half the town throws a party out of spite. Someone converts. Someone else calls it betrayal. And always, someone thinks they're holier than the rest. Then there's class, if you can even call it that. The man with 6 cows looks down on the man with 4. The family with a piano acts like royalty. The girl who wore a clean dress twice in 1 week? She's putting on airs. You don't need castles and crowns to have class wars. You just need humans. And if none of that boils over into full-blown violence, there's still nature to spark the match. A dry season leads to crop failure. Crop failure leads to hunger. Hunger leads to theft. Theft leads to blood. Then someone gets shot. Someone gets blamed. And someone gets buried. And afterward, everyone pretends nothing happened. Conflict doesn't always explode. Sometimes it simmers, like coffee left too long on the fire. Bitter. Burnt. Waiting for the right moment to boil over. So you mind your words. You fix your fence twice if it touches your neighbor's land. You lend your axe, but not your gun. You go to the barn instead of the saloon when you're angry. Because out here, grudges get passed down like heirlooms. And revenge, well, doesn't always need a reason. Sometimes all it takes is a long afternoon, a bottle, a bad memory, and one more cold winter nobody asked for. The sun drops behind the hills. Fast. Too fast. One moment the world is gold and shadow. The next, it's gone. And in its place comes the dark. Not the soft dark of cities. Not a dim hallway or a flick of a switch. This is true dark. A darkness that swallows sound. That presses against windows. That makes grown men whisper and dogs growl at nothing. You stand by the door, listening. The wind has changed. It whistles now, sharp and mean. Somewhere outside, a loose shutter bangs once. You jump. Because night in the Wild West doesn't just bring cold, it brings fear. You lock the door. Not that it would stop anything determined. The latch is a piece of bent iron and a prayer. But you lock it anyway. Inside, the fire is your only friend. You stoke it, feed it, protect it. Because once it dies, you're alone with the dark. Lanterns flicker. You ration oil. Too much, and you'll run out. Too little, and you'll stub your toe on the rifle by the bed. And maybe knock it over. The shadows stretch long across the walls. Your coat on a peg looks like a man. Your reflection in the window looks like something else. You try not to look. The house creaks, wood expanding, settling, breathing. At least that's what you tell yourself. But you remember the stories. Everyone does. Of people who vanished during the night. Of cabins left with meals half-eaten. Of boot prints leading away, not toward. You tell yourself it's just wolves. But even wolves don't knock. And then there's fire. You think snow is your enemy. But fire is the real killer. A single spark. A kicked-over lantern. A log rolled too far. And your entire world, your cabin, your food, your bed, is gone in minutes. No one comes running. There's no fire brigade. There's just your boots, a bucket, and your own 2 hands. So every night, you stare at the fire like it's a loaded gun. You love it. You fear it. You need it. You can't trust it. Just like the people around you. You sleep with your rifle nearby, sometimes beside you, sometimes under the pillow, sometimes across your chest like a child clutching a toy. Because raiders don't announce themselves. Horse hooves in the night. A cry, a scream, a single gunshot echoing across the valley. Sometimes it's bandits. Sometimes it's someone angry about a fence line. Sometimes it's nothing at all. But still, You sleep in your boots, just in case you have to run. The children huddle closer. Even if they won't say it, they feel it too. That deep ancestral fear, the one that says, something's out there. The wind rattles the shutters again. Is it wind? You can't be sure, so you get up. Lantern in one hand, rifle in the other. You peer through the window. Frosted glass, black trees. Nothing moves. And yet, you can't shake the feeling that you're being watched. You return to the fire. You don't speak, because you don't want to wake up what might be listening. Night brings silence, but not peace. You think of the graves out back, the ones without names, the ones with crosses so weather-worn they lean like old drunks. You think of the baby who didn't make it, of the neighbor who shot himself last spring, of the trapper who never came back. You think of your own death in honest terms, not fearfully, not dramatically, just as a fact. Because out here, death isn't far away. It's closer than the next town, closer than the next snowfall. Sometimes it's already inside the house. A cough that won't stop, a fever that won't break, a silence that lingers too long. You lie down eventually, wrapped in every blanket you own. The fire cracks. A mouse scurries in the wall. The dog growls in its sleep. You stare at the ceiling and wonder if it'll hold. You wonder if your child will wake up coughing, if the roof will cave under snow, if the wolves will come closer tonight, if your neighbor will show up drunk and angry again. You wonder how many nights you can keep doing this. And still, you close your eyes, not because it's safe, but because it's what you do, because you have no choice. You rest one hand on the rifle, one foot half out of the blanket, just in case. And as sleep creeps in, slow, cautious, like a thief, you know something most people today have forgotten. That night is not your friend. It is a door, a gate, and sometimes an ending. But for now, the fire still burns. The wind hasn't found a way in, and you're still here, still alive. The wind is quiet now, not gone, just resting. It hums against the cabin walls, low and tired, like a lullaby from the bones of the land. The fire is down to coals, orange glowing, steady, not hot enough to burn, just warm enough to glow. Your eyelids are heavy. You feel it behind your eyes, in your chest. The kind of tired that isn't just from work, but from being, from staying upright, from carrying the day on your back like firewood. And what a day it was. You woke in the cold. You built fire from nothing. You ate whatever didn't kill you. You worked until your arms forgot how to bend. You listened to the silence. You watched for danger. You made it through the dark. And that's no small thing. Because life in the Wild West wasn't about thriving. It was about enduring. No conveniences, no safety nets, no backup plans. Just the same dirt, the same boots, the same knife you used to cut food, mend wood, and dig graves. Tonight, as you lie beneath a patchwork of worn blankets and stiff wool, your ears tune to the quietest sounds. The dog's breathing, the shift of coals in the stove, Maybe a soft snore from the other side of the room. Maybe a creak from the beams above. Your old roof still holding, despite everything. There's comfort here. Not luxury, not even peace, but comfort in its most primal form. You're dry, you're warm, barely, but enough. And you're alive. And maybe for tonight, that's more than enough. It's hard to put into words just how much strength it took to survive in the Wild West. Not just strength of body, but strength of will. To keep going when the frost bit your fingers. To hope when your crops failed. To love. After burying someone you can still see when you close your eyes. The people of the frontier didn't just ride horses and shoot pistols. They endured silence. They held grief with both hands. They made homes out of mud, bone, and memory. And every day, they got up and did it again. There were no parades, no applause, just the quiet knowing that tomorrow might be harder. And they'd face it anyway. So as you lie there now, listening to the last soft pops of the fire, you can be grateful. Grateful for central heating, for medicine, for soft pillows, for warm socks that didn't come from a dead animal and a desperate barter. Grateful that you can close your eyes without worrying the roof will cave in, that your water won't freeze overnight, that your child won't cough themselves into silence. We're so far removed from that life now, so comfortably distant from the hardship that shaped the land we live on. But if you tilt your head, if you listen close, you can still hear them. The echoes, the stories, the footsteps in the snow. And maybe, just maybe, you carry a little piece of them in you. That quiet resilience, that bone-deep stubbornness, that calm voice inside that says, keep going. You've made it this far. So tonight, as the wind settles and the walls grow still and the dark wraps around the cabin like a soft, worn coat, you let go, let your breath slow, let your muscles release, let the thoughts quiet. There's no more work to do tonight. No fire to chop, no fence to mend, no ghosts to chase away. Just you, here, now, safe. So as you drift off, remember, you don't have to wake up in the Wild West. You don't have to scrape ice from the inside of your windows. You don't have to eat cold beans for breakfast or break the ice in a water bucket just to brush your teeth. You've earned your soft bed, your clean sheets, your quiet room. Let the fire burn low. Let the old ghosts keep watch. Let the cabin dream without you for a while. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next story.